Horrid Henry's new teacher. Da, da, da! Now, Henry, said Dad, today is the first day of school. A chance for a fresh start with the new teacher. Yeah, scowled Horrid Henry. He hated the first day of term. Another year, another teacher to show who was boss. His first teacher, Miss Marvel, had run screaming from the classroom after 2 weeks. His next teacher, Mrs. Zip, had run screaming from the classroom after 1 day. Breaking in new teachers wasn't easy, thought Henry, but someone had to do it. Dad got out a piece of paper and waved it. Henry, I never want to read another school report like this again, he said. Why can't your school reports be like Peter's? Henry started whistling. Pay attention, Henry, shouted Dad. This is important. Look at this report. Henry's school report. It has been horrible teaching Henry this year. He is rude, lazy and disruptive. The worst student I have ever taught. Behaviour, horrid. English, horrid. Maths, horrid. Science, horrid. PE, horrid. Signed, Mrs. Rose. What about my report? Said Perfect Peter. Dad beamed. Your report was perfect, Peter, said Dad. Keep up the wonderful work. Peter's school report. It has been a pleasure teaching Peter this year. He is polite, hard-working and cooperative. The best student I have ever taught. Behaviour, perfect. English, perfect. Maths, perfect. Science, perfect. PE, perfect. Peter smiled proudly. You'll just have to try harder, Henry, said Peter smirking. Horrid Henry was a shark, sinking his teeth into a drowning sailor. Ow! Shrieked Peter. Henry bits me! Don't be horrid, Henry, shouted Dad, or no TV for a week. I don't care, muttered Henry. When he became king, he'd make it a law that parents, not children, had to go to school. Horrid Henry pushed and shoved his way into class and grabbed the seat next to Rude Ralph. Na, 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 I've got a new football, said Ralph. Henry didn't have a football. He kicked his through Moody Margaret's window. Who cares, said Horrid Henry. The classroom door slammed. It was Mr. Nerdon, the toughest, meanest and nastiest teacher in the school. Silence, he said, glaring at them with his bulging eyes. I don't want to hear a sound. I don't even want to hear anyone breathe. The class held its breath. Good, he growled. I'm Mr. Nerdon. Henry snorted. What a stupid name. Nerd, he whispered to Ralph. Rude Ralph giggled. Nerdy nerd, whispered Horrid Henry, snickering. Mr. Nerdon walked up to Henry and jabbed his finger in his face. Quiet, you horrible boy, said Mr. Nerdon. I've got my eye on you. Oh, yes, I've heard about your other teachers. Bah, I'm made of stronger stuff. There will be no nonsense in my class. We'll see about that, thought Henry. Our first sums for the year are on the board. Now get to work, ordered Mr. Nerdon. Horrid Henry had an idea. Quickly he scribbled a note to Ralph. Ralph, I'll bet you that I can make Mr. Nerdon run screaming out of class by the end of lunchtime. No way, Henry. If I do, will you give me your new football? Okay. But if you don't, you have to give me your pound coin. Okay. Horrid Henry took a deep breath and went to work. He rolled up some paper, stuffed it in his mouth and spat it out. The spitball whizzed through the air and pinged Mr. Nerdon on the back of his neck. Mr. Nerdon wheeled round. You! Snapped Mr. Nerdon. Don't you mess with me! It wasn't me, said Henry. It was Ralph. Liar, said Mr. Nerdon. Sit at the back of the class. Horrid Henry moved his seat next to Clever Claire. Move over, Henry, hissed Claire. You're on my desk. Henry shoved her. Move over yourself, he hissed back. Then Horrid Henry reached over and broke Claire's pencil. Henry, where's my pencil? Shrieked Claire. Mr Nerdon moved Henry next to Weepy William. Henry pinched him. Mr Nerdon moved Henry next to Tough Toby. Henry jiggled the desk. Mr Nerdon moved Henry next to Lazy Linda. Henry scribbled all over her paper. Mr Nerdon moved Henry next to Moody Margaret. Moody Margaret drew a line down the middle of the desk. Cross that line, Henry. And you're dead, said Margaret under her breath. Henry looked up. Mr Nerdon was writing spelling words on the board. Henry started to rub out Margaret's line. Stop it, Henry, said Mr Nerdon without turning round. Henry stopped. Mr Nerdon continued writing. Henry pulled Margaret's hair. Mr Nerdon moved Henry next to Beefy Bert, the biggest boy in the class. Beefy Bert was chewing his pencil and trying to add 2 + 2 without much luck. Horrid Henry inched his chair onto Beefy Bert's side of the desk. Bert ignored him. Henry poked him. Bert ignored him. Henry hit him. Pow! The next thing Henry knew, he was lying on the floor, looking up at the ceiling. Beefy Bert continued chewing his pencil. What happened, Bert? Said Mr Nerdon. I dunno, said Beefy Bert. Get up off the floor, Henry, said Mr Nerdon. A faint smile appeared on the teacher's slimy lips. He hit me, said Henry. He never felt such a punch in his life. It was an accident, said Mr Nerdon. He smirked. You'll sit next to Bert from now on. That's it, thought Henry. Now it's war. How absurd to be a nerdy bird, said Horrid Henry behind Mr Nerdon's back. Slowly, Mr Nerdon turned and walked towards him. His hand was clenched into a fist. Since you're so good at rhyming, said Mr Nerdon, everyone write a poem, now. Henry slumped in his seat and groaned. A poem? Yuck. He hated poems. Even the word poem made him want to throw up. Horrid Henry caught Rude Ralph's eye. Ralph was grinning and mouthing, a pound at him. Time was running out. Despite Henry's best efforts, Mr Nerdon still hadn't run screaming from the class. Henry would have to act fast to get that football. What horrible poem could he write? Horrid Henry smiled. Quickly, he picked up his pencil and went to work. Now, who was my first victim? Said Mr Nerdon. He looked round the room. Susan, read your poem. Sour Susan stood up and read, bow wow, woof woof woof. I'm a dog, not a cat, so... Scat? Not enough rhymes, said Mr Nerdon. Next, he looked round the room. Graham, Greedy Graham, stood up and read, chocolate, chocolate, chocolate sweet, cakes and donuts can't be beat. Ice cream is my favourite treat, with lots and lots of pie to eat. Too many rhymes, said Mr Nerdon. Next, he scowled at the class. Henry tried to look as if he didn't want the teacher to call on him. Henry, snapped Mr Nerdon, read your poem. Horrid Henry stood up and read, pirates puke on stormy seas, giants spew on top of trees. Henry peeked at Mr Nerdon. He looked pale. Henry continued to read. Kings are sick in gold and lose. Dogs throw up on daddy's shoes. Henry peeked again at Mr Nerdon. He looked green. Any minute now, thought Henry, and he'll be out of here screaming. He read on. Babies love to make a mess down the front of Mum's best dress. And what car ride would be complete without the think of last night's treat. That's enough, choked Mr Nerdon. Wait, I haven't got to the good bit, said Horrid Henry. I said that's enough, gasped Mr Nerdon. You fail. He made a big black mark in his book. I threw up on the boat, shouted Greedy Graham. I threw up on the plane, shouted Sour Susan. I threw up in the car, shouted Dizzy Dave. I threw up in my telly, sobbed Weepy William. I said that's enough, ordered Mr Nerdon. He glared at Horrid Henry. Get out of here, all of you. It's lunchtime. Rats, thought Henry. Mr Nerdon was one tough teacher. Rude Ralph grabbed him. Ha ha, Henry, said Ralph. You lose. Give me that pound. No, said Henry. I've got until the end of lunch. You can't do anything to him between now and then, said Ralph. Oh, yeah, said Henry. Just watch me. Then Henry had a wonderful, spectacular idea. This was it, the best plan he'd ever had. Someday someone would stick a plaque on the school wall celebrating Henry's genius. There would be songs written about him. He'd probably even get a medal. But first things first. In order for his plan to work to perfection, he needed Peter. Perfect Peter was playing hopscotch with his friends, Tidy Ted and Spotless Sam. Hey, Peter, said Henry, how would you like to be a real member of the Black Hand? The Black Hand was Horrid Henry's secret club. Peter had wanted to join for ages, but naturally Henry would never let him. Peter's jaw dropped open. Me? Said Peter. Yes, said Henry, if you can pass the secret club test. What do I have to do? Said Peter eagerly. It's tricky, said Henry, and probably much too hard for you. Tell me, said Peter. All you have to do is lie down there, right there below that window, and stay absolutely still. You mustn't move until I tell you to. Why? Said Peter. Because that's the test, said Henry. Perfect Peter thought for a moment. Are you going to drop something on me? No, said Henry. Okay, said Peter. He lay down obediently. Underneath your shoes, said Henry. Why? Said Peter. Henry scowled. Do you want to be in the secret club or not? Said Henry. I do, said Peter. Then give me your shoes and be quiet, said Henry. I'll be checking on you. If I see you moving one little bit, you can't be in my club. Peter gave Henry his trainers, then lay still as a statue. Horrid Henry grabbed the shoes, then dashed up the stairs to his classroom. It was empty. Good. Horrid Henry went over to the window and opened it. Then he stood there, holding one of Peter's shoes in each hand. Henry waited until he heard Mr Nerdon's footsteps. Then he went into action. Help! Shouted Horrid Henry. Help! Mr Nerdon entered. He saw Henry and glowered. What are you doing here? Get out! Help! Shouted Henry. I can't hold on to him much longer. He's slipping. Ah! He's fallen. Horrid Henry held up the empty shoes. He's gone, whispered Henry. He peeked out of the window. I can't look. Mr Nerdon went pale. He ran to the window and saw Perfect Peter lying still and shoeless on the ground below. Oh no, gasped Mr Nerdon. I'm sorry, panted Henry. I tried to hold on to him, honest. Help! Screamed Mr Nerdon. He raced down the stairs. Police! Fire! Ambulance! Help! Help! He ran over to Peter and knelt by his still body. Can I get up now, Henry? Said Perfect Peter. What? Gasped Mr Nerdon. What did you say? Then the terrible truth dawned. He, Ninius Nerdon, had been tricked. You horrid boy! Go straight to the head, teacher! Now! Screeched Mr Nerdon. Perfect Peter jumped to his feet. But, spluttered Perfect Peter. Now! Screamed Mr Nerdon. How dare you! To the head! shrieked Peter. He slunk off to the head's office, weeping. Mr. Nerdon turned to race up the stairs to grab Henry. "I'll get you, Henry!" he screamed. His face was white. He looked as if he was going to faint. "Help!" screamed Mr. Nerdon. Then he fainted. Clunk, thud. Nee-naw, nee-naw, nee-naw. When the ambulance arrived, the only person lying on the ground was Mr. Nerdon. They scooped him up onto a stretcher and took him away. The perfect end to a perfect day, thought Horrid Henry, throwing his new football in the air. Peter sent home in disgrace. Mr. Nerdon gone for good. Even the news that Scary Miss Battleaxe would be teaching Henry's class didn't bother him. After all, tomorrow was another day.